Well, Ray, I did almost wear my Royals vestment, but I decided not to at the last minute, so thank you for pointing that out. But as we gather this Sunday, this gospel that we just heard, a really interesting little gospel, we get to see a little bit of tension beginning to brew among our dear apostles. And maybe we should have known that this was going to happen at some point or another. We get 12 men together, gathered together. There's going to be, at least at some point, some kind of competition between them, these 12 men. But we saw that two in particular were not just bold in their questioning, but they were also comfortable with our Lord. First, to ask that interesting question of Jesus, will you do whatever we ask of you? Who asked Jesus that question? James and John do. And not only that, then they go on to ask that second question. We want those seats of honor when you are glorified, one on your left and one on your right. So these are two bold men, James and John, and you can only imagine what these other apostles must have felt when they heard these two apostles asking the question. Maybe they were jealous that they didn't get to ask it first. But James and John, they asked it, and maybe Jesus lowered his head at that moment and said, man, I'm going to have to extend my public ministry to 6 years now, because these men, they need a lot more formation. But we see that in the end, they were not perfect men, but that's okay. Our Lord would be very patient with them. And as these two men were seeking honor and power, Jesus began to slowly teach them something very important, this great lesson of what true greatness is in life. But what does greatness look like? If you had to ask that question, what is greatness? How would you answer that? So maybe if you think of sports, as we do here in Kansas City this time of year, greatness is achieving that final championship, or maybe it's receiving that medal. That's greatness in regards to sports. Or maybe with careers, it's finally climbing to the ladder till you're to the very top and making all that money, more than you know what to do with. Maybe greatness in the family is when everybody is incredibly happy and doing very well, and everybody's needs and desires are met. Maybe that's greatness within the family. Or with your friendships, maybe true greatness in friendships is having as many followers on social media as possible. That's what it means to be great in the world of friendship. Well, we know what we think, we know what others think, but today we get to hear what God thinks, what His perspective is on greatness. And what Jesus tells us is that true greatness is found not in money or medals, but it's in service. And so if we truly want to be great, we have to love to serve. So He invites us to reflect on that today. And so we have to honestly ask ourselves, do we really love to serve? Is serving a part of my life? When was the last time I even served in my life, rather than was a person being served? Well, we do know that our apostles today, James and John, they would go on to be great servants for the church. James himself would die as a martyr for our faith, and John himself would live to a very long old life, writing one of the Gospels and the book of Revelations. He would die in exile for the faith. And so we know that they did in the end become great servants. They would drink that cup that Jesus was talking about, that cup of suffering. And these readings that really focus us on this subject of service is very appropriate, because in Rome today, something really important happened this morning in Rome. Our Holy Father declared 4 new saints for our church, 2 of which were the parents of very favorite saint of mine, Saint Therese. And so their names are now Saints Louie and Marie Zellie, or Zellie for short, Saints Louie and Zellie Martin. And they really do show us what it means to be a servant in the family. As our Holy Father read his homily this morning, so I'm glad I came second so I could read what he wrote. But our Holy Father said this morning, this couple labored day in and day out to make their home a place of prayer and of love. So they are very much servants, infusing their faith, their love, and all that they do, so that their home could be a place of love. And so a little bit about these 2 new saints. They're very important for us, as we have so many families here. So both Louie and Zellie felt a really good and strong call to the religious life in their early years. Louie himself wanted to become a monk, But he unfortunately couldn't become proficient in Latin, and I'm thankful that that's not a requirement for the priesthood these days. I would not have done well either. But little young Louis was not good at Latin, and so what did he do instead? He became a watchmaker. What do you do when you don't want to become a monk? You become a watchmaker, of course. And he was a man who loved the outdoors, and he would very much spend a lot of time outdoors with his future daughters, and he had a tremendous love for his faith. And our dear Saint Zellie, she wanted to become a nun at a very early age, but she was not allowed to because she had a few health problems that prevented her. And so instead, what do you do when you can't become a nun and you want to? You become a lace maker. And so our Saint Zellie became a lace maker, and a very good one at that. Her business was booming. So these two, Saints Louis and Zellie, eventually fell in love, and they got married just 3 months later, so a very different path than relationships these days. And the couple would end up having 9 children, only 5 of which would survive childhood. They would raise 5 beautiful girls, the 5 Martin girls, which everybody knew. And if that in itself doesn't make you a saint, I don't know what else will. 5 girls. And it would be that last child number 9, who would forever change the world with a little book, the story of her soul. And so it just makes you reflect, first off, on this in the year 2015. Just imagine if Saints Louis and Zellie had stopped at child number 8. We never would have had our dear friend, Saint Therese. Or imagine if they had cut themselves off after just child number 2. But we're thankful they went all the way to child number 9 so that we could have this great saint. And Zellie herself would die of breast cancer when our friend Therese was just 4 years old, leaving the saintly man, St. Louis, to raise 5 daughters on his own. That's certainly going to help him become a saint. And before succumbing to his own illness, Louis would slowly see daughter after daughter begin to enter the religious life. St. Therese was just 15 when she told her father that she wanted to join the convent like her sisters. And instead of just outright saying no to his young and beautiful daughter, he said it was a true honor that God was inviting him to surrender all of his daughters to him. And so after St. Louis' death, all of the sisters would eventually be in the religious life, all 5 sisters. And just to highlight how big of a day this is in the life of our faith, Saints Louis and Zellie are the very first couple in the 2,000 years of our Catholic faith to be canonized together, the first couple ever to be canonized together. They were not great theologians, they were not priests and nuns like they wanted to be. They were simply a couple that loved each other and loved their faith. They were parents, and they tried to do their best as possible at being a parent. This watchmaker and lace maker by trade, they labored day in and day out to make their home a place of true love. And boy, did they succeed in doing that very well. And so no matter what state of life we have here today, what state of life we're in, God invites us all to be servants like them and to follow his own heart. And so in doing so, we will indeed be great in God's eyes. And so the question for us is, are we up for this challenge? Are we really willing to be servants? Are we really willing to follow greatness?